back in the day, a few years ago, I would get super nervous anytime I had to do a day exterior scene. And a lot of it is because day exteriors are really hard to pull off with small crews and very tiny resources and limited amounts of gear.
Like your TV show, what is it called?
DogTimes.
I got a TV show, did you see mine? It's called I'm a Jackass.
All right, folks, we're back again with another cinematography breakdown. DogTimes Style. This was a narrative project that I shot over a year ago now. We've been going through it over on the Patreon, and I thought this particular sequence would be a fun one for us to look at here on the YouTube. To give you some background on the specs of this project, I did shoot this on the red Komodo with the 4th edition Aivascope Anamorphic adapter. So that was the amber-coated version. And then I had kind of a little bit of a hodgepodge for taking lenses. So my standard focal length was the Leica R 60mm L Merit. And then for my wide focal length, I was using the Voigtlander 40mm f2. And then for the portrait lens, the 90mm Voigtlander f2.8 APO. If you are new here or you've never seen my Aivascope anamorphic videos, I'll put the playlist down in the description below. I was having issues with any focal length beyond a 75mm. That Aivascope got really soft. And then I believe it was TJ hit me up and said, hey man, the trick is to try out this Voigtlander APO 90mm. And he was right. You know, and I did some pre-production testing, making sure those Voigtlanders matched fairly well with the Leica R, so that's what I went with. And those are the only 3 lenses that I used on this project with the Aivascope adapter. During the filming of this project, keep in mind this was last August of 2022, so it's been a long time since we did this. This was multiple setups, multiple locations every day. It was very fast-paced. We had a pretty decent-sized crew. Using that Aivascope anamorphic adapter, this is the job that made me realize I don't want this thing anymore, so I did sell it. At the end of the day, as good of an anamorphic adapter as that one is, it is still a DIY adapter, so it does come with all of those DIY drawbacks, setbacks, whatever you want to call them. The biggest one for me that I realized during the color grading of this project, it was very easy for that adapter to get knocked off of alignment. Now, if you guys saw my videos, you know that I created kind of an interesting way to use it on the 15mm base plate rods. And so it's just a very easy and quick way to just slide the anamorphic adapter back and forth. So it wasn't like we were screwing it and reattaching it directly to the taking lenses. The fact that we were just simply sliding it back and forth on the rails, it was still getting off of alignment somehow. And I don't know if it's just because, you know, we're going from tripod to easy rig to dolly and back to tripod, back to easy rig, back to dolly to handheld. You know, so there's a lot of moving the camera around. So either way, you know, and it just slowly gets knocked off. And it's something that we didn't really notice on the day. Again, we're moving very fast paced, but in the grade, it was things that you start to notice. The cool thing about having something like the Aivascope is that you can literally put any taking lens behind it. And that's what makes it super unique and organic. I was able to, you know, create my own look essentially by pairing it with the taking lenses that I paired it with. So anyways, that's just a really quick backstory on that. Let's get in here and start breaking this down. I'm going to explain to you why we were calling this the reverse Forrest Gump. So on this particular job, I did have David Goodman from Goodman Grip and Light as my gaffer. He actually ended up being an associate producer on this job, which was really awesome because, you know, he brought a lot of cool, helpful people along to help us with this, including a production designer and set medic. And so that's what I mean. It felt like a real job for once that I was the DP on. So shout out to David and our executive producer, Bruce Wyman, on this. There's a lot of sequences that happen at this bench, particularly at this bench. There's like 4 different setups that happen at this. We shot all this stuff at the bench over the span of 2 afternoons. And, you know, it starts out with a 1-person bench scene, then it turns into a 2-person bench scene, then it turns into a 3-person bench scene, and then eventually it turns into a 5-person scene, all kind of surrounding this bench. So let me just back up here a bit and tell you, during the pre-production process, David gives me a call. You know, I'm always having conversations with everyone, you know, being the DP, that's part of the job. And David calls me, and after he read the script, and he said, oh man, this is cool. There's a lot happening in this bench. I know the perfect way we'll do it. We'll light it how they did Forrest Gump. And I said, awesome, but let's do it reverse Forrest Gump. So I had seen the BTS shots of how they lit the Forrest Gump bench scene. I believe it was floating around on Instagram at some point. Prior to my conversation with him, I had went out on the location scout with the director. And the thing with this location is, as you can tell, it's quite beautiful. It's got a lot of production value. Obviously, it looks really cool with the Aivascope anamorphic. As long as we're looking towards the pond, the shots look really nice photographically. But as soon as we go around to the front side of the bench, right, if we want to get like the front shot of him, which we did have coverage from the front as well. But for the majority of the dialogue and the actual meat of the scene that happens with both people sitting on the bench, I shot it as French overs. So if you don't know what that is, that's basically just behind them over their shoulders. Basically approach this bench scene the same as like how you would approach shooting two people at a bar or two people in the front seat of a car. Logically, it makes sense for the bench to be facing the pond, right? Logically, it would. It would look really odd to me and the director, we thought this anyways, it would look really odd if that bench was facing away from the pond. But we want to, obviously, as camera for our audience and just for a better photographic image, we want to be looking at the pond. We want that pond to be the background. And maybe you can see from some of these other shots when we did have to go like front on, it wasn't as nice looking behind our guy here, right? So you can understand the logic of this is why I was telling David, like, let's do reverse Forrest Gump. You have to understand that when you start shooting narrative projects, stuff that's actually scripted with real actors that were cast by a director or even, maybe even a casting director, you know, like you start getting into the world of real stuff, right? And it's like, it's totally different. It's a whole different beast. It's gonna be hard for you to get every single shot exactly how you envisioned it in your mind because the world is so much more about just you. You know what I mean? Like there's so much more going on. There's so many moving parts. You'll see from this BTS, it doesn't take a lot to get a really nice natural look. I totally used this tree to our advantage. I picked this location of where this bench would go during the location scout. You know, I went out on the location scout with Artemis Pro on my phone and the little Sigma FP as a director's viewfinder because it does have the red Komodo, and you can even turn on anamorphic mode with the red Komodo to use as an option as a director's viewfinder on the little Sigma FP. This is the big workhorse, the 12x12 Ultra Bounce. That is my rag, like I've mentioned in past videos. I bring my own rags, and these frames are David's frames, obviously. He's got a big grip van. We are wrapping the sun with the 12x12 Ultra Bounce. That is kind of key, and in my experience, that's been a really hard thing to get other people on board with. Really, when I'm talking about other people from different lighting philosophies or different lighting backgrounds, or I kind of refer to it as old school lighting, they don't really understand the sun wrap. They always want to bounce from the opposite side. But it was a concept that took me a long time to wrap my mind around, so it's very hard for me to articulate when I'm explaining to like a key grip or a gaffer or anybody that I'm working with, because so many times on so many sets, everybody's inclination is to bounce from the opposite side of the sun. And why that's such a horrible idea is because now you have what O'Sullivan calls the sun sandwich. And so what it is, you got to think, like if your sun's coming this way, right, and then you bounce it this way, you're going to get bright, dark down the middle. Literally a light sandwich. And it just looks like dog shit. But it's the hardest thing to describe to people.
All right, folks, before we get too deep into this, I want to show you the basic concepts of a quote-unquote perfect sun wrap, okay? I don't want to say perfect. I shouldn't have said that. This is by no means a perfect sun wrap, but this is most ideal what most guys will do when you hear about a sun wrap. So this is the very top of day 2 where we owed the front shot. So obviously this is not the reverse Forrest Gump. This is more kind of like a new modern Forrest Gump. What you'll notice here is some key ingredients. So what we have going on here, this was early in the morning, well, maybe like 8, 9, something like that by the time we got rolling here. So you'll notice the sun is over here. So we have our perfect back quarter key, right? That's what our sun is doing, but we are double breaking it. So the first break that you can't see, I believe was something like an 8x8, okay? And then what you can see is our little 4x4 frame of magic cloth with the 50-degree A-crate grid. All right, what is over here opposite this floppy is a big 12x12 Ultra Bounce, right? That's where our Ultra Bounce was living, just on the other side of this floppy. So it's on the same side as sun. Everything is keeping this way. We're keeping all that light this way. Notice this floppy here, that's unfortunately as close as we could get to the guy because remember, we're shooting anamorphic and we're doing a slow push in on the dolly. The little edge light back here, we did have to use an actual fixture. That's the Nanlite Forza 500 with the big Fresnel head on it. And the reason why we had to do that is because notice it's on the same side the same plane as the sun, so we couldn't use the dado light stream board. The sun wasn't quite high enough in the sky yet to get a good bounce with a natural edge using the dado light stream reflector board, so we did have to go with the fixture. However, as you'll notice from the footage, we kept it really dim because I wanted it kind of more natural looking. So that's like the basic sun wrap. However, that wasn't really what we were able to do with the reverse shot. So this is what happens when camera finds itself on the same side as sun. And realistically, I would have liked to schedule this stuff when the sun was, kind of what it was in the previous shot, where it was over here, right? That would make more sense. The downside is because of the limitations, as I said earlier, we had lots of multiple locations, lots of different setups, and only 3 days to shoot this entire project. The whole thing didn't take place around the bench, right? I mean, a good portion of the script took place around the bench, but not the whole movie, right? So we had lots of other locations we had to get to. So sometimes, you're at the mercy of the shooting schedule and the limitations of whatever the budget provides. So this is one of the reasons why I chose to shoot underneath this tree, because I knew I would find myself in a predicament where, oh boy, camera may be on the same side as sun. So that's where you see these floppies are brought in to kind of help control what's happening on camera side. Let's keep it off camera side as much as we can. By this time in the day, the sun has kind of moved over this way, so it's not directly behind camera. It's not going to completely front flat light us anyways, but we do have the floppies there to help us out. But you'll notice now when we're on the same side as the sun, this is where we start double breaking, sometimes even triple breaking the sun with our frames of diffusion. So this is where, the first broken one is with an 8x8, then we bring in the 6x6. But notice the big 12x12 ultra bounce, which is essentially our key light, is still on the same side as sun, right? So what we're doing here is we're still wrapping this the whole way. The difference here is now we can get our floppy pretty close to our guy. You can't see it, it's just out of frame. And then over on this side, opposite of the camera is our dado light stream for our edge light.
The trick here is it's all about timing and scheduling. So when you go on these location scouts of these day exteriors that you're shooting, you want to be using Sunseeker at that location and jumping to the day you're going to be shooting and tracking that sun. You want to use apps like Helios on the day, which is, it's made by the same people that make Artemis Pro, and it has a little finger and you can watch the arc of the sun. You can literally watch the path in live view and see where it's going. Because if you get off schedule at all, the rest of your day is going to be fucked, because the more behind schedule you get, the harder it is to perform that sun wrap. And before you know it, you'll find yourself in a situation where your key grip and your gaffer are going, oh, Justin, you're an idiot. We have to bounce it from the opposite side. And a lot of that is because it's just, you went over or something, you got behind, you weren't able to keep up with the sun, and now you have no choice but to bounce it opposite. And it's always gonna look bad. It's always gonna look worse. You gotta stay on track. You gotta try your best to keep up with the sun, because you want to keep maintaining that sun wrap. You want to keep your key light bouncing from the same side as sun. And obviously what helps here is the huge source, the 12x12, right? It's 12x12. It's a huge source. So that's helping out as well. And it's nice to have it on a big frame like this that they can tilt and do whatever they want to do with it. Everything is balancing on that shooting schedule. And as soon as you start getting behind, the sun is going to keep going, and the smaller your budget is and the smaller your crew is, the more impact it's going to have on your final image. So this is a scenario where that sun started moving, right? So we literally were doing this on the day. We were slowly tweaking that bench, right? But because these are essentially the dialogue coverage, it didn't really matter anymore. We were still able to cheat it. As you can see from the footage here, I think the sequence worked out fairly well from the wide to when the girl comes down, and then the cross coverage of when they're talking. And so if you compare this to the Forrest Gump, it is very similar. However, Forrest Gump was a different look. In the Forrest Gump world, the ultra bounce was on the same side as camera, right? Their big bounce, they were completely kind of flat filling it. Now, granted, they were shooting on film back then, so things were a little different back then. And I also failed to mention to you all that this was back when all of my day exteriors were shot with a Tiffin Ultracon. I've talked about it a lot on this channel. I know my Patreon is sick of hearing about it. It's a filter that Tiffin won an Emmy Award for. It literally just squeezes the waveform, so it really helps lifting the blacks, and then it also brings down the highlights. It just kind of literally it squeezes your waveform. It's just called the Ultracon. I used to use it religiously on every day exterior. It didn't matter what the job was. That was what I did last year. This year, I haven't really been leaning on it too much, mainly because on this job, sometimes we got boned because I also, in this matte box here, I was using the Bright Tangerine 1 tray with the 138mm Revar Cine circular Pola combined with the 2mm thin Revar Cine linear Pola. So I basically created my own huge 138mm variable ND, but then I had to put another Firecrest one-stop IR ND in the front to, to make it an IR variable ND. That's 3 pieces of glass just to make the big 138 variable IR ND. And then in front of that is Ultracon. And then for our girl, because it was a very stylistic piece, there was a certain choice that was made in pre-production where our female actress got her own filter. And that was a white Pro Mist filter that we screwed directly onto the Aivascope. So now you're talking about 5 pieces of glass in front of the Komodo. It's just one of the downsides of the Komodo not having internal NDs. Looking back on this, I wish I would have used the mica variable ND lens adapter. I just wish I would have, and that would have limited the amount of glass we had in front of the lens, because some shots got really weird looking really fast, and I'd really rather not show them to you all. Just rest assured, it was not too good, right? And if you must see it, then you check out the Patreon. We do plenty of real earth-shattering reveals over there, right? So shout out to Miggy. He shot our BTS for us. You gotta have the tools to do these big day exteriors, and by having all these different tools, the diffusions, the bounce, the mirror board, we're essentially turning the sun into multiple sources. And don't forget, like, all the floppies that we have around too. Consider, trying to bounce from the same side as sun. It really comes down to the blocking where your subject is in relation to the sun. I mean, that's really all it is. Problem is, depending on how long your scene is, or if there's a lot of traveling going on, we got lucky, right? This is just a bench, right? The bench can't move. It gets more tricky if it's like a long Steadicam shot or a lot of movement or something. As you can tell, I tried to add movement with the little rig wheels dolly here. This piece could have definitely still been more nuanced. As I said earlier, I'm never 100% satisfied with anything I do. And keep in mind, we shot this over a year ago. We shot this in August 2022. So much has changed the way I work and how I approach things. I mean, almost weekly, my workflow and my process is changing. And I just think that's how everyone should be. This is literally what we do on the Patreon every week. So if you're into this, every week we do breakdowns. We're currently going over this project. This was a huge project, so we've been breaking it down for quite some time. Anyways, we'll see you in the next one. That is a wrap.
All right.
But it's
look fucking beautiful. That looks right there. So simple.
Yeah.
And so stunningly fucking beautiful. It's
Yeah.
such a beautiful shot. Look
Yeah.
at this. Look at this. That is stunning.